There we go. All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Marnie Dow. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers, and I serve as the Assistant Director for Student Involvement here at UNLV. Colt, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Colt Kraus. I'm the Assistant Director for Student Government and Activities, and I go by he, him, his. And hopefully this doesn't happen, but I hope we don't have any guest stars. There are two cats and a dog in this house, and sometimes the cats like to co-present with me, and sometimes the dog gets a little excited. So hopefully it's just us today for this presentation. But thank
That's
you.
the work from home life. If you hear my child scream during lunchtime, I'm just warning you all. I will be on mute most of the time while Colt is presenting. But it is possible you hear my little one screaming during lunchtime in the room next door. That's presenting from home. Well, so before Colt gets started, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's here and attending. We're excited you're here. Feel free, if you have any questions, to drop them into the chat. We'll either address them as we're going or make sure we answer them at the end, whichever kind of works best. I'm going to drop into the chat one more time in case anyone needs it, the direct link for the slides for today, in case anyone would find it helpful to follow along as we go. That's the bit.ly/330 workshop slides. That is our slides for today. And in case you find any awkward skipping between the two of us, Colt is presenting, but I am managing the slides. So I will try to intuitively know when he wants to go to the next slide. But just in case you hear us awkwardly, that's what's going on. So Colt, you ready to get started? All right, let's do it.
All right, like I said, my name is Colt Kraus, and I'm the Assistant Director for Student Government and Activities, and I also advise CSUN, so that's why you see CSUN on my polo, CSUN on the slideshow. I'm using their slides for this. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to be presenting today on the importance of shared governance within RSOs, or sharing is caring. So today what we're going to talk about, finding an advisor and how to navigate working with that person in that role, setting up an officer structure and something that works for your specific organization. You're going to hear me say that a lot today because every org is very unique. And so you have to cater all of these things to what works for you and your organization. Creating governmental documents, probably one of the most important things we'll talk about, especially looking at a constitution and how you can create that from scratch. Setting expectations and means of communication within your organization, setting up a transition period, and then kind of wrapping it up with why shared governance is so important. So finding and then working with your advisor. I always tell orgs that it's good to try and match it up. So if you're a hospitality organization, then maybe you're going to want to look for like a hospitality professor or a hospitality staff member, or at the minimum, just make sure that when you're talking to the person that you're interested in, that they at least have an interest or a passion that's shared with that organization. You don't necessarily have to have that match, but an interest is always helpful. When chatting with them, you want to make sure that they have the time to put into that, and you're going to want to have a lot of communication and expectation set up with that to figure out like kind of what you want, what they want in terms of the participation. And I always tell students you should meet with the prospective advisor in person. Of course, in this virtual world, at least set up some sort of like a virtual face-to-face with them. It's not great to do it by email. And I kind of tried to use some cat pictures on the side to explain like facial expression is really important. So when you are meeting with them, watch their facial expression. If you say, will you be our advisor? And you get something like the grumpy cat, they may not be the best pick for your org. So just kind of pay attention to all of that. And also don't pressure them. It's easy to pressure some advisor to try to like be advisor for your group, but a lot of times professors and staff, they'll give into that pressure, and then that'll end up not being great for your group anyway, because if they didn't have the time or they didn't really want to do it and then you kind of talked them into it, you're not going to have the best advisor for your organization. So once they've agreed, it's very important to set expectations. And the first question that's the most important is, how involved do you want them to be? So I think you need to meet with the other student leaders in your group and figure out what kind of an involvement you want your advisor to have. and then asking them how involved do they want to be. So a good thing to start out with is your meeting attendance. I'm assuming you'll have general member meetings, you'll probably have leadership meetings. I think it's a good rule to maybe have them check in at least one general member meeting once a semester. That way the members in your organization, they see them, they have that facial recognition, and if they ever have a problem that they don't feel comfortable telling another student, they can at least go to that advisor. Also, one-on-ones is a great thing to set up as well. At least having the top officer have pretty frequent one-on-ones with them so they at least know what's going on within the organization, maybe every other week, once a month, whatever works for you, but at least keeping them in the loop is super important, especially for having an advisor that's more involved. And then the last thing is finances. Every student org does their finances a little bit differently. A lot of orgs bank at a bank, maybe US Bank in the student union. And so deciding if you want to have the advisor involved in that. Another thing that I've recommended in the past is maybe just having the advisor have access to the bank statements, either having the bank print them and those go to the advisor, or at least having them have the login information so that they can kind of get in there and see what's going on with the finances as well. All right. Setting up a good officer structure and configuration, I always recommend starting with the basics. Have a president, a vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer. You're always going to have duties for those 4 officers. So start with that. I highly recommend a singular top officer configuration. I've worked around RSOs a very long time, and I've never seen a co-presidency work ever. Or I've even had a tri-presidency. I mean, that was even worse. And you're probably thinking, oh, well, my best friend and I can do it. No, you're not going to be friends anymore. So if you make it through the year in that type of a structure, which a lot of times co-presidencies don't even make it, I've seen failed friendships come from it. So again, I just highly recommend stick to the singular leader. It just works best for the organization in the long run. So once you have the basics, your basic officer set up, then I always recommend you can start to expand and do what fits your unique RSO. So say you're a professional business organization, maybe you want to change the names of your officer positions. Maybe you want the president to be your CEO, your treasurer to be your CFO. I think using creativity and setting that up is nice for individual orgs. Or maybe you're like the culinary club and you want to have like a lead taste tester. Really, you can do whatever you want to do that works for your organization. Another thing that I think is super important is having 1, 2, even maybe like a small team that manages your marketing and your social media, especially in today's age. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, apparently that's not really being used anymore, but there are so many forms of social media and it's a lot of work to manage all of those, check the DMs, do posts, do pictures. So having at least 1 or 2 people in charge of that is always very helpful when you're setting up your officers. All right, creating governing documents. Again, I feel that this is probably one of the most important things that your organization can do. Of course, I advise the student government and we have a very large constitution and 102-page bylaws. So I work a lot with these governing documents and it's something that you need so that you can fall back on them when you need to fall back on them. I recommend starting with the Constitution. Sometimes you may not need bylaws. The difference is a constitution is more concrete, and so you want to put things in there that aren't going to change. So your officer configuration, duties of the officers, relationship with your advisor, things like that. Whereas bylaws can be additional things that may be like a little bit more or easier to change in the long run. You also could set up a code of conduct. There's operating policies. Again, I'm kind of coming to you from the lens of student government. There are a lot of founding documents you could use, but definitely your constitution is the most important. I'm gonna have Marnie jump to this link. I want to share a resource with all of you that I found on Northwestern's website. Pop over to. This is probably one of the best things that I have found in terms of helping student orgs create a constitution. If you go through this, just kind of in the table of contents, I'll just touch real quickly. You can see Your introduction and your organizational structure. Obviously, those are going to be two of the most important things that you're thinking about when you're creating an organization or when you're looking at your current organization. Of course, including your name and then having a purpose. That is very important, because why do you have a group if you don't have a purpose? So be sure you have a strong purpose. And then right there in Article 2, you can see that the organizational structure is included. They have their executive board, their committees, they have the place for their advisor. So read through this. Every section that you go to tells you a little bit about, like, this is why this is important. This is what you need to have in this section. So definitely use that. Thank you, Northwestern, for that resource. All right. Expectations and communication is the next slide. Just like you meet with your advisor, the top officers, I think, in my opinion, should also be meeting with the other officers. Now, whether that looks like a leadership team meeting once a week, every 2 weeks, or one-on-ones with every other officer, I just think that open communication is kind of the grease that keeps your RSO running really well. I do think brief one-on-ones, even check-ins with the secretary, treasurer, other officers is always a good idea. And as far as the president goes, I see the president as someone that keeps the org moving. So maybe less of a doer, more of a facilitator and organizer, even a delegator. I would say the president is more of a delegator. They're kind of like the figurehead, the one that keeps the org running. So when it comes to check-in meetings, they don't have to be long and involved. They could be something maybe every other week, and they could be really quick, just, touching base and making sure things are still going, duties are being fulfilled, and the like. I have found that using a shared Google Doc helps a lot. You can share it with your individual officers. You can put your things in it ahead of time. They can put theirs in, and then you can look at that and have the information ready for the meeting so that you're prepared with the questions that they have and they're prepared with the questions that you have. It just kind of makes things work more efficiently. And especially since we have access to the Google Suite, it's a really great tool to utilize. Again, setting expectations, that's something that you should do with each of your officers. Of course, the duties should be outlined in your Constitution, but expectations in terms of, deadlines and how often you're going to meet and being on time to meetings and maybe even dress code, all of that should be discussed. And if you don't have content, don't have a meeting. There's no need to have a meeting and waste people's time if there's nothing to talk about. But something you can do is you can always revisit expectations. So if you don't have a lot going on, it's not bad to always kind of touch base on those every now and then. Having officer team meetings is also something that I think that you should do if you don't, especially if having those meetings before general council meetings, so you can iron out all the creases and then everything is running really well when you're in those general board member meetings as well. So what do you do if an officer isn't fulfilling their duties for their officer position? I always say you have to have a conversation first. Chat with that individual. You're all college students. You're all doing probably 500 different things. This is probably not the only org that you're in or leading. You probably have a job. Maybe you're taking care of someone. So just give everybody the grace to have that conversation and check in. As the lead officer, offering help and assistance is always good. Setting timelines is something that I think is also really helpful as well. And then again, revisiting expectations and maybe setting some new expectations that are more helpful to the person that might be struggling can be very helpful. If you get through this and things don't improve, I've had students that I've worked with before where they continually have these conversations. If you've had one, even two of these conversations and things aren't changing, don't waste your time. I mean, probably things aren't going to change, and that's a lot of stress on you. This is where those governing documents come in, and they're really important, because if you have things outlined in those documents, they've seen those documents, they should have read them, it's set out ahead of time. They know if they're not fulfilling their duties that this is going to happen. That way, you don't have to be the bad person. You can just let the documents do their job. So kind of going back to that, I highly, highly recommend that you set a procedure for officer removal in your Constitution. That way it's there, it's set out, there is an expectation for that, and you can just move forward if this happens. And also remember you're a team. You don't have to deal with these things alone, and you should definitely talk to your advisor. They're there to help you. There's a reason why advisor and advice sound very similar, because they're there to offer you advice when situations like these come up. And also talk to your other officers. Again, you're a team, and so they might have thoughts, ideas, advice. Maybe they know one of those officers better and they know what's going on, and so they can help you with that. And the biggest thing is, don't be a micromanager. Nobody likes a micromanager. You have your duties, the other officers have their duties, and everybody should stay in their own lane with that. Transition periods. This is unfortunately where I feel RSOs really strike out the most. Setting up a transition period is super important, because what's the point of having your org run extremely well and then one officer team leaves and another comes in and nothing is shared? Then that new officer team has to start from scratch, recreate the wheel. There's no reason to have that when there's all this knowledge there already. So share the knowledge. Consider having each officer create a transition guide for the position. In CSUN, I definitely have, every director has a guide, and it's really great. They outline things that worked, things that didn't work, any outstanding projects that maybe didn't get finished that they would like to see continued. And then also sharing helpful contacts, like, oh, this is who we've used in the past that has helped us with t-shirts and they gave us a discount, or Colt from the student government, or Marnie from SIA, just different resources that you can utilize that will help the org in the long run. And I think when you do these transitions, old officers should sit down and meet with the new officers to kind of go over this. And these transitions, they can be living documents, and they should be living documents, because you read through it, you take it over, and then you start altering it in your leadership role for the next person, so that then they can kind of carry on that same thing. Something that a lot of teams forget about is you have to transition signers on accounts. So if you bank at US Bank in the Union or another bank, you have to transition those. And since that's more of like, I'm going to say, a real world thing, they require legal documentation and signatures to change that. And that sometimes takes a little bit of time. Like, you have to have multiple officers sign off, multiple officers sign on. Sometimes the advisor has to be involved in that as well. So when you're thinking about your transitions, you shouldn't be setting your transition period in May. You all have finals. The outgoing officers will probably be graduating, looking for jobs. So it's usually a good idea to look at maybe like mid-ish to late April at the latest. So that gives you the time that you need to transition things fully. Another thing with the bank is, if you have like a bank card, usually they put the name of the treasurer on that. So that's going to have to be shredded, and then it's going to take some time to get a new card. So you're going to be at a standstill for spending from your account as well. So again, just some things to keep in mind, because when you set these up, you're ultimately helping the organization in the long run function at a more efficient level. So here we are at the end, and I haven't even answered the question of why it's so important. Mostly have just helped you figure out how you can transition and set these things up. So one person really just can't do it all. And that's probably debatable. One person, I suppose, could do it all, but it really isn't the best. It's just not sustainable for the organization. You could have the best person in the world lead the organization and do all the duties of all the officers, but then once that person leaves, the longevity of the organization is not being taken into consideration. It's better to have a team doing things, transitioning, getting other people to have that experience, do a range of seniors all the way down to first year students that can get involved. So you have all that knowledge kind of continuing within the organization. Also, burnout is real. I experience burnout sometimes. I'm sure Marnie has, especially on her skin from her sunburn. But sharing responsibilities, it's really important, because it helps you avoid burnout. And if you haven't experienced burnout, good for you. That's great. But if you try to do everything all on your own, you are eventually going to burn that out, or burn yourself out, especially when you're a college student and trying to do classes and everything else that you have going on. And college is a time to learn and grow. Student orgs are important, but if you mess up, this is the time to do it, because it's not as big of a deal now as if you were maybe out in the real world and on an organization out there, this is your time to learn and grow so that then you're prepared to be on other organizations when you're out in your real job and your real career. And also, probably the most important thing, like college is a time to have fun. So organizations should be fun. You join an RSO to meet people and to be social and have fun. And leading should also be fun. So when governance is shared, it kind of lightens every person's workload and it allows more time for everybody to enjoy the experience overall. So that is the end of the presentation. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Colt. Colt is always, anyone who's ever knows Colt at all knows that there will be at least 3 photos of cats or memes of cats in everything that he does. We've got some questions coming in. We'll make sure we get those. I'm going to unshare my screen so you can just see Colt and I chatting. Just give me 1 second. That way it's a little easier to kind of facilitate a conversation here. There we go. Hi. All right. Is that better? Perfect. So I see we have a couple questions come in. Do you recommend a certain layout for taking meeting notes?
That's a good question. So the student government is bound by Nevada open meeting law, which is super annoying. So it's nice that RSOs don't have to do that. I recommend starting meetings with an agenda and sharing the agenda ahead of time. That way kind of everybody is ready. And that's a great question. I'm glad you said that because I didn't even think about this till now. But an agenda is a good way to set your meeting up so everybody knows what's going to happen and they know what information needs to be brought to the table. With the secretaries that I work with in CSUN, I usually will just have them use that agenda then as kind of the skeleton for their notes. And then as you go through each item, they'll just keep the notes under each of those items. That way they can keep up and then everything is kind of in the same order. And that has worked pretty well for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I always recommend the same thing, starting with everyone should know, no one should show up to an e-board meeting and be like, I don't know what we're going to talk about today. You should have some sort of look at ahead of time, but even then making sure when people step into a space or whether it be virtual or in person, that there is like, okay, here are the things we're going to talk about. And then whose job is it to take notes? Don't just assume that somebody's taking notes. It should be in your, if you've got a secretary in your constitution, if it's going to be the secretary's responsibility to take notes, make sure that's clearly delineated. The idea of notes should be if I miss, if I'm the social media manager and I'm meeting, I should be able to look at the agenda and a general, pretty specific idea of what was talked about. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to want to check in with the president and be like, hey, I missed that meeting. Like, I see you all talked about this and I see some notes. Can you like provide more context for me or something? That's a really good thing. But then also, expectations. How quickly are those notes getting done and published, whether that be if they're taking them in the moment on a shared document, meaning that they're immediately available, or if there's an expectation that they be ready within 24 hours and emailed out to your either e-board or general members, whatever the structure of your organization is. I think that's a really important idea of like, this is not just like oh, someone should be taking notes. It's highly important it happens. It's somebody's responsibility and there's an accountability of how it's happening. I see another question came in about key topics to be included in a transition guide. Before you answer that one, Colt, I'm just going to mention that tomorrow from our office, so typically in the spring semester, we always offer a transition workshop, but because we've been doing so much virtually, we recorded our transition workshop last year, so I chose not to do a live one again this year. Tomorrow I'm going to send it's on our YouTube page if you want to go look at it now. There's a whole like 45-minute recorded workshop, but I'd highly encourage you to go workshop. I'm also going to send it out by email tomorrow as just a like, here's a bunch of stuff you should think about in transition. That doesn't mean I don't also want to hear from Colt and talk about it now, but I just wanted to kind of put that out there that we have some transition resources. But yeah, I would love to hear from Colt. What do you think are some of the like key topics?
I definitely think finances is probably your number one. Again, just because you've got to get those signatures transitioned over. And especially if you're in, again, from the CSUN lens, if you're going to be requesting money from CSUN, you know, letting the new people know what that process looks like, handing over receipts, because receipts need to be turned in to CSUN as well, and things that I probably won't even know what I'm talking about. Like an EIN number is a number that you should have in your financial documents that's used to open a bank account. Like that should be something that's transitioned over. Um, with us having access to the G Suite, I always recommend setting up like a shared drive. Drives are better than folders because with a drive, it's easy to exchange permissions on that, and it's not one person has permission to any one document, so you don't have to try to track people down to get permissions or whatever. But like scanning and putting documents like the EIN and that in there is good. Also, the NSHE registered supplier information, that is another thing that is utilized to request money from CSUN. And quite frequently that doesn't get passed on. And there's usually some transitioning that needs to happen with that too. So long-winded, I apologize. Definitely finances, number one. And then I think number two is your advisor, like having a meet and greet, at least trying to for sure have the old president introduce them to the new president. But I think having all of the officers meet with the advisor, even in a group setting or one-on-one, is really helpful too, just so that they can stay involved and they feel like they're a part of it. A lot of times when advisors just kind of get brushed to the side, then they end up like not wanting to be the advisor anyway. So I think trying to keep them in the loop as much as possible is also super important.
Yeah, I think sometimes students kind of forget how much of a resource an advisor can be. And then if you're not constantly working on that relationship and you're kind of letting that relationship go, then when you really need your advisor there, you don't have that existing trust and support. They're easy to look to for advice and guidance when you all are struggling or need help or just don't really know how to navigate a situation. So I think all of what I kind of want to echo something that Colt said is about the shared drive. So if you, I want to put a shameless plug for you to ask for help from our office if you have not done so already, to create an @unlv.edu email address for your organization. So if you are the Harry Potter Club, instead of having Harry Potter Club, UNLV Harry Potter Club at gmail.com, you can, through our office, request that you be Harry Potter Club at unlv.edu. And there's a huge reason why I recommend you do that. One, it helps provide some legitimacy to your organization. It makes people feel more comfortable about your email address. But the biggest thing is IT can reset your password and transition that email account and all of the associated files in your drive if someone doesn't transition your password, doesn't reset it, password gets lost, whatever. If you just have a random Gmail, Hotmail account, whatever, we have no access to help you. But I get this all the time. Hey, the last officer got really mad at us and she won't transition anything. Or we forgot to ask for access for information before they graduated and we haven't heard from them and now we don't have any of our old files. If that were a UNLV email address, I can literally just call OIT and be like, hey, can you reassign it to me, reset the password, and then I'll transition it to the new officers. So it can be a huge help to you. And in that same conversation, whatever documents that you create, the owners of those documents should be the group account. So it shouldn't be, if I'm the president, the owner of the document should not be Marnie and I share it with Harry Potter Club at unlv.edu. That's a bad idea. I should create the document as with Harry Potter Club at UNLV as the owner, and then you can happily share it with other people, but that way you never have to transition your documents. They are always owned by the organization and you're never worried about like, oh, I'm not the owner, I didn't have edit privileges, now I can't see it, I can't access it, that person isn't available. I hear that over and over again for student organizations. So that's that idea. It just goes back to that like concept of shared governance. Documentation is part of shared governance. So setting up your documentation in a way that is always going to be in a shared governance platform and doesn't rely on anyone transitioning, as much as going to be an auto transition, that's going to help you out. That's one less thing to put on your transition checklist. So I hope that answered some of those questions about the transition guide. I see a question about, is there a guide on why and how to request money from CSUN? I think Colt and I can both speak to that. I'm dropping a link into the chat. So that is CSUN's website. So while Colt is the overall advisor to all that is CSUN, I serve specifically as an advisor to the Ways and Means Committee, which is a subset of senators who provide supplemental funding to student organizations to help student organizations at UNLV. So the website is really good at explaining, there's an operating policy on it, fully explains what they do and don't. Idea of what Ways and Means does through supplemental fund, student organization funding, is that they're not going to be your primary source of funding. We have 400 student organizations. So many student organizations are doing so much. We can't be your only source of funding. We just don't have enough money. But we want to help supplement what you're doing. So things that the committee loves to give you all money for is anything that's going to help you get your name out there. If you want nice polos like Colt is wearing today, or organizational t-shirts, they're going to help you fund those. Any marketing materials, if you need a new pop-up tent for your organization for, involvement fair and other programs. If you need any sort of like structural items, if you are like a technical organization, say you're a photography related student organization and you want to buy some technology or equipment, like some tripods or something like that, they might help you with those things. If you are outside of this year when travel is not encouraged, but when we go back to a normal, I'm going to put that in quotes, normal existence, CSUN will help supplement some of the cost of travel related to presenting, conferences, to site visits, whatever the case may be. They can help supplement some of that funding. Trying to think some other things they don't fund. The number one thing they typically don't fund is food, because everyone would love to have food at their events, and we would spend all our money on food and no money would be left for anything else. So if you want pizza at your events, they're not going to fund that. The one caveat is if you say you're the African Student Association and you want to you have an event that's available to the entire campus community if they want to come, and you're going to serve traditional African food as a way to sort of educate the campus community about a culture. That's the one exception to the food rule. But really, CSUN wants to give you money for your student organization. Their goal is to run out of money at the end of each academic year related to student organization funding. The only way you can get that funding is if you put in a request for it. So you have to plan a little bit ahead. You have to create a budget. You have to provide quotes of what you're looking for and kind of an explanation of why you want funding. And then you present to the committee and then to Senate, and then they will decide how much to allocate to your organization. The max amount of funding you can get is determined by the size of your organization. Our largest organizations can ask for up to $10,000. Our small organizations can ask for up to, I think it's $3,000. So it really just kind of depends on the size of your organization. Colt, do you think I missed anything on the major points of Ways and Means?
No, I think that's perfect. And do be sure that you have all of your information updated in the Involvement Center, because they look at the Involvement Center to figure out your actual who's in your organization. So and now the requests go through the Involvement Center, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because we changed the system. So I think you should just use the Involvement Center in general for your student org, because it has places where you can store documents and communicate and everything too, but it's used heavily for that process for requesting funds.
Okay. There's a question in there about knowing if, can we get the information to get help to set that up? We had the problem you're speaking about right now. We do not even know if there are any UNLV emails for them already. So what I just dropped into the chat is a form request. So if you're starting from scratch and you're like, I don't think we have a UNLV email, and you want that form that I just dropped in there, basically, I'm just going to ask you some really basic questions. Submit the form on your behalf. It has to come from a staff member. So I'm happy to if you're just like, I want to set one up now. If you're not sure if you think one exists, I can always send an email to IT and ask them like, hey, this organization thinks this email exists. Or I can say like, the Harry Potter Club thinks there might be a UNLV email. Can you possibly do some looking? They may or may not. I don't know how much information they need. I can try to send them an email that's a little bit vague. Sometimes they want some specificity, but there's no harm in me asking. So if you think for any reason that you think there might already be one, let me know. I'm also going to put my email address in there, marnie.dow@unlv.edu. I'm sure Colt would happily put his email address in there too as well. If you have any questions for him, you might as well put both of them in there at the same time. But when it comes to your email address, feel free. I'm a good resource for you. I put in those requests, and then basically it takes, maybe 24 to 48 hours where they'll set up an ACE account and send me all the credentials, and I'll get them to you, and then you just reset the password to whatever you all need. But in terms of the general idea of where do you start from, say you have a lot of like disparate documents kind of all over the place, get your organizational account set up. It doesn't have to be a UNLV one, even though we highly recommend it. If you already have, you're an organization that's been on campus for 10 years, you've had the same email address, Gmail email account for 10 years, and you don't want to change it, you can keep it. We can't help you reset the passwords on it, but it doesn't mean you can't keep it. But that's when, maybe you either assign a new position, like a documentarian or somebody, say like, we have 10 years worth of documents that are all over the place. They're not in any like folders or drives. There's no, like, we don't know who owns all of these. So maybe some of it is recreating documents, re-uploading them, whatever, but you can make that somebody's responsibility to say like, okay, what documents are, the most essential? Let's start, triage, like these are the most essential to maybe the least essential on a list. Take the things that are most essential, recreate them or change ownership to the organizational account, and figure out a system of folders that are going to make sense. If you just have everything randomly in your drive and you're relying on someone to know what it was titled to be able to search for it, that can get really frustrating. But having folders of like, let's say we could have like an events folder, and then in that events folder, you could have fall 2020, spring 2021, and then all your documents related to your events in that semester will just all be in that folder. So people aren't just randomly searching. It happens to me all the time where, someone will share a document with me and I won't know, it wasn't like in a folder, it's just randomly shared with me, and I can't remember what that document was titled. I know it was like, it happens to me all the time, like, for example, on something related to orientation. There's this document, every time I need access to it, I can never remember what it's titled because orientation is not in the title. And I always start looking for things related to orientation, and I finally started and like put it in my favorites bar, but I was like, every time I go looking for this, I can't remember what it's titled. So if you're relying on that for your members, so like every time I have to go looking for this, did they call it budget? Did they call it request? Did they call it this? Did they call it that? Can get really frustrating. So some sort of organizational system that doesn't just make sense to you, but ask the other members in your once you create a structure, like ask someone else. I can be like, hey Colt, I said look at a bunch of folders. Does that make sense? Or like does that only work in my brain, or does that work in your brain too? That's part of the shared governance is nobody is an island. So if I need help, I need to reach out to the other officers or members in the organization to kind of facilitate that conversation.
And one other thing too is like, especially when it comes, if you have bylaws, be sure you have a Word version of those saved somewhere, not just a PDF, so that if you do get into a situation where you need to change those or whatnot, you have an editable form and you don't have to retype that whole document out.
That's a clutch one. It's the worst when you're like, I have this 10-page PDF and I can't find the Word document for this. Uh-oh, and we need to change something on it. That can be really frustrating. I know we only have I'm going to say we have about 10 minutes left. If anyone has more questions, feel free to drop them in. But while Colt was talking, there were a couple things I thought might be helpful between the two of us. We both have a lot of experience in this area for just kind of us talk about as resources for all of you all. So Colt, how do you feel about group me's or text chains or group chats?
I mean, from an advisor standpoint, I don't love them. I don't love GroupMe at all, actually. And it's probably just me, but I hate being put into group text because, like, especially as an advisor, like maybe for the students it works because you're up at all hours or whatever. But for me, if I'm like it's like 10 o'clock and I'm getting all these messages, I'm like, I don't want these. So I think especially talk to your advisor, but if GroupMe works for your student org, like I know in CSUN, one director created a GroupMe with like just their department and it worked for them. Whatever works best. I know Slack is another one that CSUN has used, which is a little bit more professional of a platform. Um, I'm trying to think of other things. It seems like now things have shifted to just people DMing each other on Instagram. Apparently not Facebook. Apparently Facebook is like out. So
We're
I'm all
old. We're real
right.
old.
And then I'm trying to think of that new thing that everybody's probably making fun of me in front of their computers right now. Discord. Discord.
Yes.
Like that's all I hear about now. And apparently I'm also supposed to be monitoring CSUNs, but I don't even like know what it is or where it is. But it seems like that is like the new popular thing.
Yes, a lot of our student orgs have started Discord channels. Again, I am also an old lady who just, I just had my 38th birthday this week. I don't know anything about Discord. I'm not going to lie. I've tried to learn and it's just not for me, but I know it works for a lot of our student organizations. So I do want to touch on, I have a love-hate relationship with GroupMe's, whatever, it doesn't have to be GroupMe, but just the general idea of a group chat. Things it works really well for. Hey, I just need this little piece of information, or I have, like, when are we gonna meet on this or whatever, trying to set up a time to talk about something. Things it does not work for is planning events, having large discussions, or managing conflict is the number one thing I hate about GroupMe and all of those. I cannot tell you the number of times I've had officers of organizations come to me and be like, we're a mess. There's so much conflict in our organization. We can't figure out this or that. We're fighting about this. And when I ask them to explain things to me, they'll be like, oh, here's all the screenshots from our GroupMe. And I'll read them. I'll be like, well, you aren't talking to each other. You're typing at each other. You have no context. You're not looking for answers from each other. Like there's no like clues from how people are saying things. People say things differently in text versus in person. So I know it can be frustrating, but sometimes you can accomplish way more in a 20-minute meeting, whether it be virtual or in person, than you can in 4 hours of yelling at each other on GroupMe. So it just doesn't work well for conversations that have a lot of content or that might have differing opinions. Things that are just like little things aren't that big of a deal. The other thing I would recommend if you're creating like some sort of group channel is decide, is this only for business, or are we going to just send memes to each other and make each other laugh? Because some people will be like, I'm so annoyed that I have 400 messages. They will stop reading things. And if I have to scroll through 20 memes I don't care about to get to the one sentence that pertains to me, I'm never getting to it. So just that parameter, or for some people, they'll be like, this is our GroupMe for like actual business. We send it over, we use this, whatever. Separating those out. I know it's easy to say that, and then sometimes they sort of bleed together. But a lot of people, that's the number one way to get people to tune out of your conversation, is to start putting things in there that aren't business related.
Mm-hmm.
Happens all the time. Okay, I also wanted, you said something really important at the beginning that I think just sort of encompasses the entire idea of why shared governance, which is the idea that presidents and student leaders overall are facilitators and not doers. So the number one thing I think I see in conflict is when an officer doesn't want to give up control or wants to kind of be like, I can do it all. And they don't know how to delegate. They don't know how to share responsibility. They don't know how to share decision making. They just sort of make decisions on behalf of others. That is a skill you have to learn. And being a part of a student organization is your opportunity to learn it. But I just want to encourage all of you all to look at your officer roles as teammate positions and not in leadership. Does not mean I do all the things. Sometimes it means I do these things, I figure out what I do and what I delegate. Sometimes it means I just help others find what they're good at and encourage them to do those things. If I have someone that comes to me, if I'm the president of an organization and we have a general member that comes to us and it's like, I really want to get involved, I want to be on the e-board. Instead of just being like, oh, well, the secretary position's open, do you want that? Maybe having a conversation with them and be like, well, what do you love about our organization? What excites you? What are you interested in? What skill sets do you have? And maybe they tell you like they have graphic design background. Oh, that'd be great. Can you make all of these Canva materials? And can you be our social media person? That's like those conversations can really help. And that comes from the leader as facilitator, not doer kind of mindset that Colt mentioned earlier. Is there anything else on that you want to touch on before I move on?
No, I think you hit that nail on the head. I think definitely when and that's part of learning to lead, learning to delegate. And I know that can be really, really hard. I mean, even when I was in college, I kind of struggled with that a little bit because it's like, when you do it, it's going to get done, but you've got to like learn to trust your officer team. So I think that's super important.
Yeah. And then the last piece of advice that I kind of thought about while you were speaking is it's okay to admit you don't know how to do something or you've made a mistake. How many times have you seen things spiral just because someone doesn't want to admit that they didn't know what they were doing, or they made a mistake, or they messed up, or whatever the case may be?
In CSUN all the time, pride is our biggest enemy in there. And I always tell people, I'm like, you're going to mess up. Like, it's just going to happen. Like, you could be the most perfect person in the world and you're still going to mess up, and it's okay. And you're not going to get in trouble. You're not going to get yelled at unless you like lie about it and you try to cover it up. Come to us and tell us, and then we'll help you figure out how to get out of it. I think that that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I think that your officers will feel the same way. If you are a part of a team and you have an oops or you forget to do something and you just kind of double down on that mistake and it gets worse and worse and spirals, the people on your team are not going to be mad that you made the original mistake. That's not where their anger comes from. Their anger comes from, you didn't tell us about it, nobody knew this needed to happen, and then you lied to us about it, and then you gaslit us about it, and like that's where anger festers. If you're just like are open and honest to be like, hey, I know I was supposed to get this thing done today and I'm really sorry, my midterms got in the way, like I'm gonna get it done today, and you create that own level of accountability, your other students are probably going to understand that and be much more willing to like, team attitude than if you're just like, oh no, I did that, I'll get it to you later, I'm not at my computer right now to send it to you. That doesn't go well. Okay, one last chance before we close up. If anyone has any more questions, add it into the chat. But I just wanted to say an enormous thank you to Colt for presenting today, for kind of just generally having this. I like this conversation at the back half of the presentation. I think was hopefully helpful to you all as well. Any last kind of thoughts you want to give us, Colt?
No, thank you for participating. It's nice to have people come to these. So, and really, if you do have any questions about anything, definitely use my email. I'm very in tune with email. You'll get pretty quick responses. And then that goes for like anything CSUN related, student org funding, anything that we can help you make your org better with, we are happy to help.
Yeah, and if we're not the people to help you, we'll get you to the right person that is. All right, thank you all so much for being here. I really enjoyed today. We'll get the recording of this up on our YouTube channel pretty soon, so that if you have anyone else in your organization that used today's conversation but couldn't make it or whatever, you can go ahead and send that along. But otherwise, I'm going to hit stop on the recording and say thank you all for joining us. Bye.